Welcome everybody to our fifth presentation in our series of presentations for the Del Rio Trail. So thrilled that all of you were able to join us today. My name's Donald Gensler. I run our Office of Arts and Culture Art in Public Places program. And we were fortunate enough a number of years ago, well, not a number of years ago, about a year ago, to receive a grant from the Clean Act California to help fund a series of art interventions along the trail. I'm joined today by three of my team members, Linda Jolly, Beth Jones, you guys say hi, and Diana Rufner, who's in the background helping us with technical work. So it's definitely a collaborative effort, and Beth and Linda have been leading the pack, helping us develop these projects, permanent public art projects along the trail. 20 artists, though, local artists, created a whole series of pieces that are currently on exhibit at Twisted Track Gallery at 12th and R Street. So I encourage all of you to go take a look at that. The show actually is up for this is the final week, and it comes down on July 29th. So please go check that out at Twisted Track Gallery. Our show is called Before and Beyond, and it's featuring 20 artists that were commissioned to make work about the Del Rio Trail. Today, however, we're excited to present Stephen Glassman and Glassman Studio to present their proposal. Hi, Stephen, for the Del Rio Trail. Stephen's location is about from Riverside Boulevard to Southland Park Drive. And it's been a real pleasure to work with Stephen and his team. I actually have happened to meet Stephen a number of years back. And so it's always interesting to see paths kind of cross again and see Stephen really dive into this work and be very site specific in terms of how he's thinking about how this work has evolved. So I'm excited for him to share his presentation with you all today. As we've done in the past presentations, if you could feel free to type any comments or questions you have in the chat, and we'll address those after Stephen has completed his presentation. And then also afterwards, you're welcome to raise your hand or ask any questions or make comments at that time as well. Lastly, as many of you know, all of these presentations, this being our fifth, are being recorded and will live on our Office of Arts and Culture YouTube channel. Unfortunately, the last two presentations have been a little bit slower to get up, but I promise you in the next couple days, those will be up, as well as Stephen Glassman's presentation that you're going to see today. So with that, we are thrilled to have Stephen present to us today this exciting project, the Del Rio Trail, going all the way from Pocket Road all the way to Riverside Boulevard, connecting with other trails there. Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to your capable hands.
All right. Thank you. Let me share screen. And here we go. All right. Very excited about the project and very excited to present. Before I do, I want to share some background on our studio and the practice, as it will inform the deeper dimensions of this work. I think of my work as drawing in space, and my inquiry is very specific of gesture, scale, and social impact. Though the work is rooted in site and community, the intention is not narrative or commentary. Rather, I'm kind of fond of saying that if the world is a bell, then art is the hammer. And I'm out to create works that generate an essential strike on the civic environs that rings true. And it's my desire that those waves of resonance create a safe space that transcends all those self-imposed social and conceptual barriers that we all carry, and takes root as a space of mystery that each and every viewer can fill with their own experiences, their own memories, their own myths. So the studio is based in a rigorous drawing practice. Drawing as an investigation of touch, the art of control and accident. Scale and gesture, sans gravity. But coincident with sans gravity is bamboo, which is probably my oldest and most personal medium. With it, I can work intuitively on an architectural scale with the spontaneity of drawing. It gave birth to my practice of drawing in space. And over time, the line of bamboo became inextricably linked to the line of my hand. And it gave me the ability to move into and kind of attack the social fabric as a raw canvas. Back in the 90s, Los Angeles was rocked by disasters and uprisings that tore holes in communities and civic fabric. I moved into these devastated sites to create bamboo installations as expressions of resiliency and connectedness. Essentially, working privately and intuitively, yet in public, I took on building a social dialogue and introduced the form of the bridge as social metaphor. These works were, in fact, my entry into art in public. The bridge, as a metaphor, is the act of reaching across. It's a gesture of generosity. And in structural terms, reaching across manifests not only as bridges, but as cantilevers, as roads, as canals, basically as railroads. Basically, one can think of everything in infrastructure as a bridge and beyond infrastructure. This work led to an invitation for me to represent Los Angeles at the European Cultural Capital Festival in Antwerp, where ironically, I captured the imagination of the European scientific community. And I was invited to create a work for their 4th International Congress in Bali. Little tangent, they saw this work as an embodiment of rhizome theory, which at that time was emerging to displace postmodernism. And in fact, rhizome theory, as I grew into it, became very fundamental to my practice and how I organized and built my studio and run my projects to this day. In Bali, I created the Sylvia Campuan Bridge. This bridge spanned a 35-foot river gorge and connected a rural village to a bamboo forest. 5,000 people crossed this bridge in a single weekend. It was my first structural work and the first work that really fused gesture and structure. And as I watched the crowds of people crossing over it was, and the understanding of this structure as a form, not just of sculpture, but of service, it was really deeply gratifying. So the Sylvia Campuan Bridge opened me up to a whole world of scale and structure. So this project was Southeast Shear, which was an NEA White House Millennium project of the Clinton White House, and Hillary was chair. The sculpture actually, despite its verticality, created place, which is very rhizomatic. It was miraculous. The project was really miraculous in that it was wholeheartedly embraced by the people of Pine Bluff, who contributed generously and enthusiastically in all ways. Now, this is the deep rural red South. So it was astonishing on a national level. It became a national flagship project. Because this, for me, this was community as rhizome, and art transcending boundaries. This was that resonant strike. County bridge crews, logging crews, Port Authority, utilities, private construction companies, a wide range of community collaboration contributed to this project. And there was this special mix of rawness and possibility expressed in the artwork that became part of Pine Bluff local lore, and went on to inspire further development of the park waterfront. On a more sort of academic sculptural level, Southeast here was perhaps the first significant appearance of this opening to this form of opening to the sky in my work. It's a form that I find to be naturally optimistic. And that eye to the sky concept comes from a long practice that continues to this day in the art of Japanese kite. Kite was in fact my entry into sculpture and my introduction to bamboo. This is a piece called Below Above. It's another gesture of sky to ground, below, above. It's a temporary installation at the Cornerstone Gardens in Sonoma. It's on a John Greenlee meadow, if that means anything to anybody. Horizon and our relationship to it is fundamental to my work. Horizon is where sky meets ground. And on a very fundamental level, we define ourselves in relationship to the horizon. As a species, human beings are the only ones that grow perpendicular to the horizon. This project is open air, which literally elevates nature above the horizon. And coincident with bamboo and reaching for the sky is a parallel and related inquiry of love and stone. Stone is weight and foundation. Stone is kind of like the black in my palette. Stone occurs in my work as monument and symbol, as landmark, as its own opposite, as an irrational act, and as permanent public artworks moved more central in my practice in studio, I began to explore the power of a more monolithic and singular gesture. Spectacle is an active component to my approach. It comes from my roots in the theater. Site works often become performance spaces. Parkour at Dos Picos. Dance at Whitetail Plaza. I even use performance as a means of form and concept development in the studio. This is LAX. So all these concepts that I've been sharing with you came together in the New York City waterfront skyscraper project called Flows Two Ways. Flows Two Ways is an homage to the Hudson River, and it was created for the Art Angle's first skyscraper project, the Via 57 in Manhattan. Flows Two Ways is a transliteration of the native people's name for the Hudson, Mahaya Canuck, flows two ways. So the project incorporates boulder, stone, eye to sky. The piece is 8 stories tall. the intuitive gesture on a civic scale, generating a signature landmark. You know, in this particular project, the skyscrapers around were the size of mountains. And within the pedestrian experience, the aesthetic and conceptual intent of the architecture is beyond the periphery of the pedestrian experience. It's like being in canyons. And the intent and the meaning and the concept of the development can be lost. So I believe that in public development projects of this scale, that public art is the largest scale at which a singular experience of sight can be delivered directly to the human scale. A child here told me that this piece is how she knows she's home. And performance is also part of the completion of this work. This is an excerpt from a short film called Ghost Story that actually premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. Issei Miyake styled it with us, and it shows the details and the experience of sight and peace as a single whole. So in around 2019, as an effort to bring brushstroke into my drawings in space, I incorporated a randomly found feather into a work in progress. And with the presence of that feather, the drawings in space became more painterly. This work was evolving through studies in collapse and resilience. And the introduction of the feather brought to form in the work a new conceptual and sculptural inquiry for me, that of migration as an essential force and dimension of life on Earth, as real as gravity. The migration of peoples, of species, geologies, atmospheres. And with the onset of COVID, viruses. And as the global quarantine descended on all of us, this materiality and process became my sole singular studio practice. Manifesting as suspended tensile amalgams of enameled bamboo, brass, light, and feathers, they intentionally occupied the territory of chandelier. It was a focused gesture of bringing spectacle into the private and domestic space. These pieces embody frailty and hope, chaos and control, construct, gesture, darkness, light, collapse, resilience, and they echo forces larger than ourselves. This work carried me through the pandemic, and I titled it Hope. Hope is a Thing of Feathers. It's drawing, as is my practice again, the move toward the singular gesture, and scale. We began working with chief engineers at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill that pioneer biomimetic engineering. And we began investigating feathers as their own phenomena of their structure and materiality, with the intention of generating it on an architectural scale. And to create, ultimately, a kind of sculptural calligraphic medium with which our studio could proceed to build a language of spatial and civic poetics. Hope is a Thing of Feathers continues as a studio inquiry, and it's generating an ongoing portfolio of works, from giant site works to small, intimate editions. But it's conceived as a single collective and decentralized global work, a swarm of feathers in a global wind, a tumbling sort of swarm of feathers in a global wind that connects us all as humans. So this is our Del Rio concept proposal. It's in two parts. This is the first part. We have the northernmost section of the trail, and this is the northernmost point of the trailhead. It's a 15-foot structurally translucent feather, balanced atop a 23-foot tilted needle at the edge of the railway bridge bluff, just south of the freeway overpass. The piece marks the northernmost trailhead. The feather dances omnidirectionally in the wind and light, above the horizon and against the sky. It's visible from the river, the levee, the freeway, the bikeway, adjacent neighborhoods, and from within the park itself. For me, our sculpture celebrates the creation of the park itself. The global forces of the past 5 years have been immense, and our vulnerability as a species and a society have become glaringly apparent. Outdoor public space has emerged as paramount for the civic health and future of our cities. And civic parks and green space have been elevated from public amenity to urgent necessity. In this context, the Del Rio Trail is monumental because it secures public sanctuary, it generates creativity, it builds social resiliency, it provides access to nature, and it strengthens community. The trail, to me, establishes a positive foundation for generations to come. And this sculpture is proposed as a piece as a civic gesture of radical hope. This particular northernmost site work is minimalist in its form, specifically conceived to bring maximum concept and creativity to the most precise point, and thus generate the greatest possible impact. Each component is simple yet layered. The mast is a tapered needle tilted directly south, and as such, it acts as an inverse compass to true north, providing a kind of timeless orientation of place, and facilitates stargazing, constellation hunting. It's easy to find the North Star from this point. The tapered mast also gives a feeling of even greater height. Rather than the pointed end piercing the ground like an arrow or a spike, the form suggests the needle has risen from the ground, perhaps even being pulled up by the feather, like a flower pulls up its stem. In fact, the curved spine of the feather is parabolic and opens to the sky as that aspirational and optimistic gesture. It's asymmetrically balanced and becomes a kinetic cantilever, that structural gesture of reaching out. And at rest, in its neutrally buoyant position, it is slightly vertical, bringing the eye to the sky. The feather is laser cut aluminum. It's structurally translucent. Light passes through it. It is layered, and those layers generate more rays. The piece literally shimmers in the light and casts dramatic shadows down the hillside and across the trail. Where needle and quill meet, is an engineered universal kinetic joint, allowing the piece to blow omnidirectionally in the wind. Feathers exist as myth and metaphor across all cultures. And for me, feathers are soft edges, are just simply soft edges that I use to carve the air and make art. But as sculpture, this piece for me embraces our human and social vulnerability and expresses our optimism. So feather and stone are essential human elements. Coincident, they occurred at the same time with stone carving. You know, at a huge fossil dig used to be a tidal pool, and the clamshells that scientists are finding there had a unique sort of cut in their shells, which baffled scientists for years, but finally concluded that this was a doodle. It was a random gesture for no reason. It was art. This art is the human differentiator. And in that same context, I can imagine a hominoid ape finding a feather and contemplating it for something beyond what it is. And that moment could be one of the earliest moments of human imagination. So at the southern end of the Del Rio Trail, just southern end of our section of the Del Rio Trail, just south of Sutterville Road, we intend to find and place the largest possible boulder directly upon the abandoned track. A feather is sandblasted deeply into its surface, where it will live as a discovered image. It kind of thrills me that this piece will survive our civilization. This is sky to ground, and it's intended to be evocative of petroglyphs, of scratch drawings, of fossils. And when approaching from the south, it marks an entry point to the northern trail section. But it occurs almost as a random act, like an accident, and it generates an experience of discovery and mystery. As an action, as a sculpture and a gesture, it's intended to be an act of reclamation, celebrating and historically marking the transformation of this vestige of 19th century heavy metal industry to a 21st century green urban artery. The connection of stone and feather and sky and ground over the course of the passing of this trail defines this section of the trail as a singular space and experience. So these are the site locations. The piece is roughly 28 feet tall, variable, of course, with the wind, 15 feet in diameter. Now, the piece is not so large. So when up close and near the piece, it's worthy of, the surface will be pondered deeply. So the craftsmanship will be to a very high degree. It's 3/16-inch laser cut aluminum generated from those biomimetic drawings and studies. The translucency is achieved almost organically. It is one main layer of uncoated aluminum, which will turn a chalky white, and a second semi-layer on either side that goes from side to side of colored aluminum, generating the distinctive patterning of the feather, in this case, a hawk feather, and generating the moires and the shimmering. The central quill of the spine is a bowed and tapered quill, 15 feet long. fabricated in two semi-cylindrical halves that clamp together and form a continuous bound spine. And as I said before, the quill cantilevers asymmetrically, the feather cantilevers asymmetrically, with the balance point at 3 feet, with the feather extending 12 feet in one direction and the quill and its counterweight, embedded counterweight, extending 3 feet in the other. This is the engineering feasibility studies. We're hoping to collaborate with the DRT landscape architect, in particular with a feather with tree placement and possibly could collaborate on the native plantings around the massive boulder on the southern end to explore the concept of preservation and the reclamation and the recontextualization of the abandoned and transformed track. We love these opportunities because I think it's what public art has to offer. Period. Coming from the north, the first glance of the piece, I think, will be more subtle and spark a double take. It's a familiar form in the distance and not overwhelming, one that's not to be unexpected. It's a hawk feather. And from a distance, the scale is not glaringly burlesque. It's not an Oldenburg. I love Oldenburg. Mm-hmm. But almost immediately, that sort of warped context will be undeniable and bewildering. And the travelers will be drawn into the park at this fork, into the park for a closer look. And this is exactly what I mean in my work. When on RFQs, I will often say that I think of my work as generating a crack in the quotidian facades that spark a space of wonder. This is literally that. Or to paraphrase Leonard Cohen, the cracks are where the light gets in. Upon finally encountering the piece, a hiker will find themselves atop this west-facing bluff from which they can enjoy a vista that encompasses the river, the freeway, the levee, the park, the zoo, the occasional passing of the antique steam engine, and fabulous sunsets. Really excited about our collaborators. SOM reveres working with artists, and they're fabulous, and their reputation is global, historic, and legendary. Milgo Bufkin, we've done a number of projects with them. They created Flows Two Ways. They're an amazing 4th generation metal fabricator based in Brooklyn with a passion for large-scale sculpture and have a stellar repertoire. Bruce Gitlin, the CEO of Milgo, was in fact chairman of the Pratt Art Institute for many years. And that's the piece as seen from entering from the street, as seen from the freeways. Our timeline. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad you went through a number of your past pieces to kind of lead up to this, because I think that's a really important component of your proposal and how it fits into this larger conversation that you've been having around drawing in space, and then somewhat more recently, like you explained, since 2019, with this feather motif starting to enter your work more regularly. So I think that's really helpful to show how kind of your work is grounded both within this experience of the Del Rio Trail, but maybe more specifically also your own personal creative experience and creative journey, that where this feather and stone have been, recurring motifs in your work. So that was really nice to see that. Thanks for including that. At this point, what we want to do is open up for any discussion or questions that folks might have for Stephen about his proposal. I have some questions and comments that I can add as well, but just wanted to know if anybody wanted to make any comments first based on Stephen's proposal for this site along the Del Rio Trail.
Want to say it was a great presentation, and just so looking forward to seeing it actually installed next summer. Both pieces, love them both, Stephen.
Thank you.
And they really do work together. I mean, I think
Yes.
that's an important aspect of this. We, as a team, went back and forth a bit with Stephen and his team, and trying to think about how this would work along the trail. Stephen, I think the wayfinding concept is certainly achieved, like you've really illustrated nicely by showing. I'm not sure if people realized. Actually, could you pull up that image, Stephen? You're actually on the river trail, looking across I-5 to the sculpture. Could you pull that image up real quick? Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to comment, this, I believe, came out of a site visit that we did with Stephen and his team. One of the things that for me has always been really important about Stephen's concept here, and as I think as he's described his relationship to kind of the sky and the horizon, this is a really critical juncture in that there is an existing trail that's here to your right, that then will allow you to go to the left where this current rail line is, where there is now a pedestrian trail. So Stephen, in many ways, your sculpture will in many ways be signaling, this trail ahead. Because we really won't have much signage here because it's on a levee. I don't know what signage will be allowed to go here at the beginning of this. So I personally have always been really excited about this notion that coming, like you described, from the north area here, going south, your sculpture will be that kind of fluttering piece that we'll see on ahead of us, and hopefully kind of draw us further. And actually, if you would bring up the stone, an image of that stone on the tracks. So great. And so I think that this is important as well. And Stephen, I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit. One of the things that we have discussed in a lot of the presentations is, in my mind, interesting art, and this includes public art, has multiple interpretations, that it it's not, you know, didactic in its approach. It's not specific or illustrative of any one particular concept, but that there might be kind of multiple levels of entry. Stephen described his own, you know, interest in the sky to ground, the interest of the historic nature of the stone itself, or of the carving of the petroglyphs. I mean, almost kind of before time. And Stephen, by the way, I highly encourage you, and I don't know if we have it on our website yet, I really want you to listen to Josiah Catalan's musical piece that he created for the trail, that and performed at the opening at the beginning of July. But we should have that recording on the website soon if we don't already. Josiah Catalan, because Josiah's concept was to create this, and he had it performed by City Water, to create this kind of musical piece that would take you through before there was the trail, before there was anything. It was kind of the birth, the creation myth almost, to like this idea of the transcontinental railroad that was there. And at a certain point in his music, you heard this like, you know, this like kind of reverberation of sound, kind of similar to you know, a train. And then also into like the notion of the sounds or the things that might happen in the trail after it's installed. So anyway, just an interesting piece reflecting on your stone here. And could you just talk a little bit, you told me a little bit of a story of a friend of yours that was very interested in trains. And could you just talk a little bit about the relationship to why this stone on the tracks is important for you, and that you think brings meaning, you believe brings meaning to this, and, you know, and all the different levels that you can read the work?
Well, firstly, I would say that, as you might recall from one of my slides of stone, is stone as an irrational act. And the placing of the stone, you know, the placing of the stone in the landscape could be overlooked because its context is not shifted. And therefore, it doesn't invite further investigation or generate, and it may miss the opportunity to generate more meaning in the encounter. Whereas when it's placed on the track, it's jarring. It's that crack in the quotidian experience. It jars an expected order. So in itself, strictly sculpturally speaking, it generates greater dimension and impact. But likewise, and I think I said it, it's so I have he's almost a nephew, now grown, a young man who is on the Asperger spectrum somewhere, and at a very early age latched onto trains as just a core North Star. Trains are his North Star. And he would come to Sacramento often to ride the trains and the Railroad Museum. And I was talking to him about this piece, and that there was, you know, there may be some concerns about placing the stone on the track, that it might upset the history of rail in Sacramento. It might be seen as upsetting that history. And his completely honest and unconscious response was, but it is history. It kind of makes it more historical. And I thought that was great. You know, I always think that a lot of times on these public projects like this, I remember doing something on the Wilmington waterfront, and down here in Los Angeles, the Port of LA, and everyone was talking in the community about, the guy who started it, it was 100 or 100, like 100 years ago or something like that. And it occurred to me, and I said to them, listen, that was 100 years ago. We're doing a major park here on this waterfront. And a lot of these trees, a lot of the full vision of this park won't even, won't even reach maturity until 75 years from now. What about you? What about this moment in history? Let's not devalue the importance of the present. And that's what the feather does, sort of for me as the post-pandemic age and the beginning of this new green artery. Let's not devalue what we're doing in the present, because that's the future in not too long ago. I mean, we're talking about the history of rail, but what are we talking about? 150 years. I mean, I love rail. I love the forms. I love the industrial age, but we're talking 150 years. History goes way further back, and it will be way further forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's nice. And I think that idea of the stone going much further back, but also a nod to the Transcontinental Railroad and to the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was Sacramento. Yeah, and that your stone in some ways symbolically, represents that there is that end point. Here, physically, there will be an end point in that the steam train won't be able to go past Sutterville Road, and your stone just beyond that marker is there in some ways, kind of symbolically recognizing this transportation history. And I mean, interestingly enough, you literally have rail line, highway, and river, all three almost within eye shot of one another.
Well, that was why I wanted to put that feather right there.
Yeah, and honestly, where you stand on the tracks, where you can see your feather, you literally can see the tracks, the highway, and the river. So again, I say this also just to recognize again that I think art is often about different interpretations and different ways that people can bring their own kind of personal experience into the work. And I personally, I think I appreciate that because it can challenge us, but also allow us to make some kind of, thoughts or decisions on what we think the work might be about. And then bring ourselves into that conversation.
For me, what you're describing is that resonant strike.
On the bell that you described.
That resonates beyond itself. The echoing of forces larger than ourselves. And also that these are essential human gestures, the stone, the feather, and they have resonance in our souls.
Absolutely.
I think that also there's the element of time in the experience, in that we tend to look at these things and think, what does this object mean? And we put these objects here, but there's times these will live in, this trail will live over time, and it will be revisited. And it's like listening to a piece of music. You can come back to a Beethoven symphony and hear something that you haven't heard before, forever. And I think that those meanings and that experience will unfold over time. People will grow up, children will grow up, and this will be, a constant for them.
Absolutely. So actually, if you could just go back quick to one of those views of the feather at the site, that would be great. As we just kind of start to wrap this up. Oh, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, I think so, Stephen. And I think the concept here, you know, with the wayfinding pieces, but also with the gathering space pieces, is that this very much becomes a destination space for people, both people within this local community that will know this trail and use this trail, but people that may come to Sacramento to visit and go certain places and say, oh, and while we're there, we should check out the Del Rio Trail.
Right.
And so we're looking forward to working with you to capturing some of the, you know, some of the kind of explanation or some of your own kind of artist statement for this work that we would capture in a sign and some signage. But again, not wanting too much either. And trying to find a space. We'll work with you to find a space where that sign would go so that people can also have their own interpretations that aren't right and aren't wrong, and, you know, can be whatever it might mean to them. And like you said, growing up with it over time and seeing that stone on the tracks or coming and seeing this feather fluttering. So we'll work with you on that signage, and then also including in that kind of series of signs and kind of additional wayfinding that'll happen along the trail, that will have, so we're talking today with some folks in our history center about the different panels that we're going to develop. And I think one of them should absolutely be about transportation and the railroad, and this notion of different types of transportation, river, you know, highway, rail. And I think maybe best placed somewhere, you know, not far from your area either, because I do think it brings up some of that.
Infrastructure is rhizome. It is the act of reaching across. And, you know, the verticality is only a manifestation of the integrated horizontal whole. That's rhizome theory.
Well, great. Well, I think some of that would be really, really wonderful. So we'll talk with you about that. What makes the most sense in terms of what language to share with people, because I think that will add to their experience. And they'll have their own interpretations and thoughts, but then be able to read about what kind of motivations or, you know, inspirations you've had in creating this work. Well, that's wonderful. In case and let me see if there's any other comments or if anybody else has any other questions. Beth, yes.
Sometimes I feel like a cheerleader when we're watching these presentations, but I'm just going to say once again, thank you, Stephen Glassman and your team, for a great proposal, a great presentation. I loved all the background information. I think it was really, really helpful. Even though we have seen some of your past projects, it really was very informative. But I'm also really so happy that this is the site where this work ended up, because it is truly like a landmark and a wonderful beginning to, you know, the Del Rio Trail is like a gift to Sacramento anyway, but that Donald Gensler wrote a grant and got us public art on it too is, you know, more than icing on the cake. It's really going to appoint it in such a thoughtful way and make it more even destination, I think, just to see the artwork. So
Right.
Thank you for your contribution, and it's really, really great. Wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
kinetic. So the point of kinetic attachment, I'm assuming, is the needle and the
Right.
quill.
Yeah.
Right.
So what a, yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the kinetic portion of it too. I think that movement will be great. And also, just to clarify, there are many people involved in us receiving this Clean Act grant. And while I did write much of the narrative, I just really can't say enough about our work with Public Works, a whole host of folks in Public Works, folks within my office and the Office of Arts and Culture, and other folks throughout the city, also, of course, in the Parks Department, who have really been instrumental in making this happen, both in the conceptual beginnings of this, even just writing the grant, to now being able to execute on this. And we were just meeting today about a whole series of pieces and how these works will line up along the trail. So I'm just so thrilled and passionate about this opportunity we've had to work together as a city, to work with all of these artists, and to work with all of you who are here to watch these presentations, either if you're watching it with us today live or you're watching it recorded. We appreciate you being part of this. We hope that you'll continue to join us. We have our next presentation tomorrow, the 25th at 12 p.m., where Adam Frank will be presenting his design proposal. And then the last proposal will be this Thursday, 12 p.m. Matthew Mazzota will be presenting his design proposal. So again, thanks to everybody who's made this project happen thus far. Stephen, thank you, and Aaron and your team for a wonderful proposal and presentation. We look forward to working with you to develop this concept into the final design package, and excited for everybody to be able to see this work. Hopefully by July 2024 will be installed. If you are interested, you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at dgensler@cityofsacramento.org, and check out our website, delriotrailart.org, where we try to continue to update and put new information on that website as well about all the different projects in the Del Rio Trail. And lastly, please do try to swing by Twisted Track Gallery at 12th and R to see the artist's work. We had one artist with us today, Jillian, who had to leave, but Jillian created a whole series of songs, children's songs for the Del Rio Trail, and you can hear those as well at the gallery space. So again, Stephen Glassman Studio, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow, and thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Donald.
We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Take care.
You.